Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I have read a lot of books this year, and today I'm going to talk about all the books that I've read, fantasy, romance, and new releases, and whether or not they're worth the hype. The first book I read this year is Blood of Hercules by Jasmine Mast. This book was easily a 5-star read, and it takes place in this futuristic Greek mythology world where the main character Alexis finds out that she has Spartan blood in her, so she has to go train at this war Spartan academy. And this book is a romantasy book, but it had so many plot twists, the banter was amazing, and it is enemies to lovers. I also really love this book because there was so much tension and high stakes, and this book is just so entertaining. I highly recommend it. The next book I read this year is God of Malice by Rena Kent. It is the first book in her Legacy of God series, and I really tried to get into this book because so many people like it, but I found it really smut heavy and the plot was just a little bit lacking. I really like the writing style of this book, but it just wasn't for me. But if you're someone who likes dark romance where the plot is really focused on the romance, then you might like this book. The third book I read is Gleam by Raven Kennedy. This was another popular romantasy series that I just could not get behind because we're all the way into the third book and the main character, Auron, is still playing the victim even though she is one of the most powerful people in this whole series. It's a retelling of King Midas and his golden touch, except for Auron, the main character, is the one with the magic touch. Basically, King Midas needs her to keep pretending that he's the one with the power, that he can turn everything into gold if he wants to. And in order to keep his power, King Midas basically imprisons Auron in this gilded golden cage and makes her do whatever he wants. And like I said, all the way into the third book and she's still living in her cage. So I get that some people like this, but like I said, just not for me. The next book is Binding 13 by Chloe Walsh. This is a romance book that I absolutely adored. It all starts when this star rugby player, Johnny Kavanagh, accidentally hits Shannon Lynch in the head with a rugby ball, and they start talking and getting closer. I love this book because it had so much banter and was so entertaining while at the same time being really sweet. Johnny is trying to keep playing even with a hidden injury, and Shannon comes from a really abusive household, but they are really determined to work through it together. And overall, this was just a really sweet romance book and one of my favorites. The next book is Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. This book was totally worth the hype. It's about Katniss and Peeta's mentor, Haymitch, and this book is through his point of view when he was in the Hunger Games. Haymitch was in the 50th Hunger Games, which is the second quarter quell, which means that there are twice as many tributes, so the stakes are like twice as high. I absolutely loved reading through Haymitch's point of view, and this book just really ties everything that I've read in the other series together. And I absolutely recommend reading this book if you haven't already. Next up is Fearless by Lauren Roberts. It is the third book in her Powerless series. It takes place right after the bombshell that Kit dropped where he's gonna marry Peyton even though he knows his brother is in love with her. So obviously there's a lot of tension there. I enjoyed this book a lot, but I will say that it was not my favorite one in the series. However, I still do recommend reading this book because there was a lot of banter and it also does just tie everything up together. The next book is A Court of Mist and Fury. It is the second book to A Court of Thorns and Roses, and this is a reread because the ACOTAR series is gold tier. They are some of the best fantasy romance books that I will ever read. Sarah J Maas is one of my favorite authors because there's always so much banter and plot twists, and most of the books that she writes are enemies to lovers, which is one of my favorite tropes. But if you haven't read this series yet, it is one of the best series that I will ever read. The next book is Consider Me by Becca Mack. It is a hockey romance that I absolutely love. It's about Carter Beckett, who is one of the best hockey players, and Olivia Parker, who is like the only girl that will not put up with him. It's one of the best sports romances that I've read and is just a really good romance book. The next book I read is Watch Me by Tahira Mafi. I'm not going to lie, initially I read this book for Aaron Warner, but I'm glad to say that it has exceeded my expectations. It's about James James, who is Aaron Warner's little brother, and he's all grown up now. James is trying to infiltrate Ark Island, which is the last refuge for the reestablishment, and he's trying to take it down. But Rosabelle Wolf, who is the female main character, is part of the reestablishment, and she is a trained assassin whose job is to basically make sure he doesn't succeed. This is an enemies to lovers book, but my favorite part was probably just seeing all of the original characters from the Shatter Me series. But the action and the banter did not skimp in this book, and I really enjoyed it. The next book I read is Love and Other Words by Christina Lauren. It is a friends to lovers book. It's about Macy Sorensen, who is about to marry an older, financially secure man when her childhood best friend and the only guy that she's ever loved shows up, and she's starting to question everything that she's about to do. She hasn't seen this guy in several years, and there is something that happened to make them break apart. And this book alternates between past and present while telling their story. I think this book is definitely worth the hype, especially if you're looking for a romance book that'll really make you feel deep emotions. Next up is Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. I put this book off for so long because I just didn't think that it could possibly live up to the hype. But then one day I sat down and started reading it, and I couldn't have been more wrong. The stakes have never been higher because Xaden is about to turn fully Venom and lose his soul, and Violet is trying so hard to save him. The cliffhanger at the end of this book was absolutely insane, and I couldn't stop thinking about it after I finished the series. But I highly recommend this book, and I think it is worth the hype. The next book I read is Silver Elite by Danny Francis. This is probably the best book I've read all year. It's dystopian, enemies to lovers, forbidden romance, like all of the tropes that you could possibly ask for. And it's about this girl named Ren Darlington who is super powerful, but people with powers in this book are hunted and killed. But Ren is part of the rebel uprising, and her first mission is to infiltrate the Silver Block, which consists of the kingdom's most elite killers, and they're also the ones that are hunting people with powers. And while she's at this training academy, she also meets Cross Redden, who is the most powerful elite. And I would not be surprised in the slightest if this became the next big popular book. The next book is Shield of Sparrows by Devney Perry. This is a brand new release, and it is a fantasy romance. It's about a girl named Odessa who is this insignificant second princess. But all of that changes when this legendary hunter shows up and forces her to marry him. But I really enjoyed this book, and I highly recommend it. Last up is Twisted Games by Anna Huang. I'm trying to read all of Anna Huang's books, and so far Twisted Games is probably my favorite. It's an enemies to lovers forbidden romance between Bridget and her bodyguard Reese. And this was just such an amazing romance book that I recommend to anyone who just wants a good romance to get lost in. Those are all of the books I have for today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you have any suggestions, please let me know, and I'll see you in the next one.